All right. Well, I want to welcome everybody back to another episode of the Empower Grief Journey podcast. I'm your host, Chris Mamoni, and I'm an acceptance coach who helps people heal from grief, loss, and trauma to discover their self acceptance and step into their personal power. This podcast is your dedicated space for healing, growth, and transformation. Each episode shares insightful and inspirational stories, along with practical tools and actionable insights to help you guide you along your healing journey. Today, I'm excited to have Gina Heimer with us today. Her struggles began at the age of 8 and progressed into different ways to attempt coping with several instances of trauma in her life. Although not without hurdles over the years and still having moments of figuring things out, she's chosen to rise above the ashes of the darkness that tried to burn her to the ground. She's also currently a Hope author, working on writing and publishing her first book about her personal battle with binge eating disorder. What began as a means to calm the storm and cover the pain associated with parental divorce, childhood sexual abuse, and early 20s sexual assault spiraled into a decisive pattern of building an armor of protection to feel safe and create a barrier from further harm by others. Her ideal audience that she works with and her business is helping women struggle with past trauma by navigating damaging food habits to shed their armor of protection and stop the cycle of being physically and spiritually malnourished in order to find healing and be intentional with how they feed their mind and body and soul. Gina, I want to say thank you for being a guest on the podcast today. I'm really excited to have you on here and give you a safe space to share your story with us.
Thank you so much, Chris. I'm very excited to be here.
Yeah, well, I remember we had a very powerful conversation about your story a
Mm.
couple weeks ago, and you brought up a lot of great topics that we're all going to touch on today in our conversation. But I want to give you the floor to share that background of your story with us, a little bit about your journey through grief and healing.
Absolutely. So, as you had mentioned, my journey began when I was 8 years old, when my parents separated and ended up divorcing. And with that situation, I started into a slight depression. It kind of came unexpectedly to me. And so I started noticing that extra helpings of food or whatever it may be, certain types of food gave me a little bit of comfort in that situation. And then you flash forward just a little bit to the age of 9, in which I started dealing with sexual abuse. And with the sexual abuse, I wasn't in a position to tell anybody about what was going on simply because there was a lot of threats being made about harm that would come to others or other things that would happen should I tell anybody. And my depression and reliance on food deepened as the sexual abuse went on and continued. And during that time period, I had my first and second attempt at wanting to end my life at a very young age of 9. Um, and you it it sounds kind of strange that you would have those kind of thoughts at such a young age, but you really don't understand how to cope or how to navigate such large scale issues at such a young age, especially when you don't feel that it's safe to tell anybody. So I was looking for a way to make the abuse stop. And so I found myself trying to run into oncoming traffic on 2 separate instances, to get hit by a car. That's what my young, immature mind thought was the best plan of action at that time. Um, and all through my adolescence and my teenage years, I was very introverted. I was very shy. I kind of like to be invisible in a room full of people. And I was just a very depressed person. Um, and, I started writing at a very young age. Music was my therapy. So if I wasn't at school or working in my teen years, I was, barricading myself in my bedroom, listening to music and making mixtapes, because that's how I knew how to heal in some way, or maybe relate to whatever was in the music. And, my reliance on food stayed the same. You know, After the sexual abuse started, I found I was hiding food and sneaking food and things like that to kind of have it on hand whenever those intense feelings of anger or sadness or discomfort or whatever it may have been came up. And then that would help soothe those instances for me in the moment. So that's, to me, that's kind of where my issues with binge eating disorder really started, because I was being very secretive about all the extra food that I was eating. And over the course of my adolescence, all through high school, my weight stayed, pretty steady. I mean, obviously you gain weight as you get older, but um, it wasn't until a week before my 21st birthday when my roommates and we were having a house party. And at that party, I ended up being raped by an acquaintance at the party. And everything just kind of spiraled from there as far as my mental health went. Um, it immediately took me back to the point I was at the younger age of 9 to 11 with the abuse. And what further caused that kind of reverting back in my mind was the very next morning he was out um, bragging about his conquest the night before. And so immediately I was like, well, no one's going to believe me. He's already put a narrative out there. And, I was like, oh, well, but then again, you're not supposed to tell anybody about those types of things. So I kept it to myself, much like I did the sexual abuse. I didn't tell anybody about that until I was in my early 20s. And then with the rape, I actually ended up telling somebody about a year later, simply because he had attempted to do the same thing to another one of our friends. And she reported it. And then with that action of her bravery, I was able then to come forward and speak about my instance a year prior. And then I had to work through the guilt and everything that came with, if I had said something sooner, perhaps this wouldn't have happened. So after the sexual assault, I started, even a little bit before then, I had started finding other ways of coping with my traumas. I was, drinking to get drunk all the time, almost nightly, if not every other night. I was doing instances of self-harm by cutting on myself. And then after the rape happened, I started with many attempts of suicide by means of medications and pills. And it wasn't until my roommate went into my room and came across my journal, where she discovered some of the things that I had been doing to harm myself. And she insisted on taking me to the emergency department for an evaluation. And I went begrudgingly. And I did agree to go into a very short-term inpatient stint at a psychiatric hospital. I was there for about 4 or 5 days. And I came out and I just went right back, unfortunately, to the same actions I had been taking. I wasn't at a point in my mentality was not in a place to want to fully deal with everything at that stage. I was still very much in I want to push it down and tuck it away and run away from it. Um, and so from there, my binge eating disorder got really out of control. I ended up, um, over the course of, I want to say 8 to 10 years, just because I can't quite remember how long it took. But I ended up putting on 160 pounds because the food to me became a way of building this body of armor. Because in my mind, and society's standards played a part in this too, in that, there's this nonsense out there that says if you look a certain way, you're deemed unattractive, right? So I kind of went and ran with that as well and said, well, if I make myself unattractive, no one's going to want to harm me physically again. And I just took that to the extreme. And I was an adult at this point, so I had a lot more regulation over what I could and couldn't buy as far as food goes. So it was easy for me to eat in excess in a private manner, to where maybe those around me wouldn't necessarily know, uh, how I was putting on all this weight if I wasn't eating outrageously in front of them. So yeah, it just ramped up over the years.
Gina, I want to thank you for being vulnerable enough to share your story with us today.
Mm,
I first off just want to say I can't imagine what that was like to go through that experience of life, especially
mm,
from a young age like that. And my heart and my empathy pours out for you. That's what I wanted to say to you today.
thank
Um,
you.
you shared a lot of very I think a lot of things people struggle with in grief, and I think one of the big ones that you touched on today, especially through your situations of sexual assault, was
Mm,
not reporting that first one when it happened, not reporting the one in college either. Like that,
mm,
I can't imagine what it's like to hold all of that in, and I think that's something that a lot of people that go through grief, because grief, in the grief space, we're told, we have to let go of things and move on, and it's just part of life, or stuff happens. And I've learned those things are really dismissive. They write off our emotions, they write off how
mm,
we feel, they write off who we are, by the way. And they also deny ourselves the experience that we had. And I think that's a
mhm,
very that's almost re-traumatizing to people who've gone through trauma. It's almost like a compound of trauma when that
mhm,
happens. And I think it makes it very hard for people to learn how to heal, or let alone figure out if healing's an option for them. Makes it very difficult. I think that, I'm happy to hear it sounds like that girl that reported that rape that happened by the same individual gave you that courage to say, this did happen to me. And this is okay if
mm,
I report this. This wasn't okay that this happened.
mm,
I'd love to ask you about that too, getting that courage from another person to finally come out and say, this is my experience, this is what happened to me. What was that process like when you made that choice to report that? Did that give you a sense of, was it a sense of empowerment, or was it a sense of, I can finally say, I can finally have a voice and share my experience?
Yeah, so it came about because my mom had reached out to me, and let me know what was happening, and she sensed something in my voice in that conversation that prompted her to essentially ask me. I don't remember exactly how she worded it, but it allowed me and opened up the door for me to share that it had happened to me a year prior. And so, I mean, I'm forever grateful for the friend of mine who was able to, she woke up thankfully before he proceeded. Um, but for her to step forward and take that and report it, it did open up that door for me. Seeing her bravery opened up that door for me. And Like I said, I had to walk through quite the season of um, guilt associated with my not saying something sooner. And I have surpassed that now, but that was a tough bridge for me to get across too. Victim's guilt, I guess you could call it. And the same individual, he ended up finally serving some jail time several years later for attempting to assault a minor. So, you know, and I wrote a letter to the judge in that circumstance to show that he's a repeat offender and they needed to take his past into consideration before his sentencing. Um, because when we went to court, he didn't serve any time. He did what's called an Alfred plea, where you kind of admit to guilt, but you know, he had to do anger management and alcohol treatment classes. That was the extent of his sentencing in our situation. So, yeah.
I think something else that I thought was really powerful that you brought up, and it's a path I've traveled in a different circumstance in my trauma journey,
Mm-hmm.
but you talked about how when that assault happened in your 20s, it brought back all those memories from being 9 years old. And I think that's something I'm really grateful you brought that up because that's a topic that I have try to tell people in my life, and it just doesn't seem to work out half the time when I try to communicate this. But when you are traumatized like that, and that can be sexual assault, that can be narcissistic behavior that you've had to go through with abuse.
Mm-hmm.
It can be in a myriad of situations in life, but a lot of people don't understand that when we experience something that heavy, especially early on like that, and then later on at this point in life, that same thing happens, just different circumstance. We're not just dealing with this thing over here that happened right here, right now in the moment. This thing back here rears its ugly head really loud. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's almost like we get I call it the double whammy hit of trauma. Because no matter how much we work on that and we try to heal it, it's still there. It's still happened. That experience never went away. We try to work through and manage it as best we can, and that's a very long process for some people. But it's still happened. It's still there. Um, I wanted to ask you what was that moment like when that flashback came from being 9 years old? I mean, how did you work through that and kind of process it when it happened?
Um, oh, it definitely uh, sent me into quite a deep depression, to be honest, because I hadn't even begun to try to heal from the trauma from my younger years. And so, even though, with the rape, I was granted some crime victims compensation to go and have therapy for that, and I did deal with that through therapy. Um, when in reality, in retrospect, I wish I would have also at that time taken that opportunity to work through the abuse from my younger years. But I didn't even really start healing from that until I was in my 30s. So many years later. But yeah, it definitely threw me into a really deep, dark time of my life. I look back on the poetry I wrote at that stage of my life, and it's hard for me to read some of it because it's so dark.
Well, I think that's one of the things that people don't know about when we go through trauma.
Mm-hmm.
I myself can share, I went through narcissistic abuse and lost a child at the same time, and not a lot of people I can share that story with because they don't get it. And I'm assuming you felt the same way going
Mm-hmm.
through what you did, especially the situation you went through. And when you say a very dark place, what I hear that a lot of people I don't think hear is somebody's been very, very hurt on a very, very deep level. And it's not
Mm-hmm.
that there's something wrong there or that they can't figure it out. It has nothing to do with that. But we got
Right.
taken very much into the place of we almost lose who we are, and
Mm-hmm.
we now have to rediscover ourselves. And and give ourselves permission to really allow ourselves to step into who we're meant to be. And I think that's a long journey when you go through trauma. It's a very long journey. Something you brought up too is victim guilt. I can share
Mm.
that I struggle with that working through my narcissistic abuse trauma I've gone through. I think we as victims don't all the time give ourselves enough credit to acknowledge our experience because we have so many
Mm.
people try to deny it and try to tell us, it wasn't that
Yeah.
big of a deal. Um, Talk to me a little bit about how you worked through that victim guilt that you may have had and stepping into that place to give yourself your personal power to just find the strength to work through that.
I worked through a little bit of it when I was in my EMDR therapy to work through the assault. But a lot of that, I mean, I hung on to that guilt probably for a good solid 10 years afterwards, maybe even longer. And there was still even an inkling of it up until, I want to say it was within the last 5 years where I actually had a conversation with my friend, you know, and, we finally kind of laid that whole conversation and situation to rest, right? Where, she solidified that she doesn't blame me. I had no control over his actions. She understood, why, knowing my backstory and stuff like that, why I felt it wasn't safe for me to come forward sooner. Um, but yeah, and that was, like I said, with just within the last 5 years, I think I finally let it all go, let any little ounce of guilt that may have still been lingering go.
I think that's really powerful. And something I want to applaud you for today that you're showing people that are going to listen to this podcast or watch it is that uh, grief doesn't have a time frame on it. It can
Mm-hmm.
take 10, 15 years to really work through those things. And it's something that got brought up on one of my podcasts I did is somebody brought up, are you fully healed? And I said, no, I'm not. And I won't ever be fully healed. And I got this funny look from this person that said, how can you say that after everything you've been through and what you're doing now? And I said, it doesn't erase what happened. It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't erase that experience of what I had to endure.
Yeah.
So to say that you're fully healed means that you've completely let go of that whole entire thing, including the experience. And that just unfortunately isn't how we work. We become better through that. Find our way
Mm-hmm.
through grief. We've learned how to navigate it so that we can step into our power and be into our authentic self in life. And
Mm-hmm.
ultimately, that leads us down a path. But it's almost if these experiences had never happened to us, we wouldn't be who we are today. So I almost feel like to say we're fully healed almost is dismissing our reality of what led us on this path to begin with.
I completely agree with that. I feel like grief and trauma, they live in the cells of our body for life. And I don't want that part of me to be completely erased, like you said, because it has formed me into the person I am because I've seen and been shown exactly how strong I've had to be to become the purpose I am or the person I am today to live out my purpose.
I wanted to ask you another question because
Mm.
when I got extremely depressed, I ballooned up to 249 pounds.
Mm-hmm.
I have a picture of myself. I still have my phone, and I laugh at myself every time I see it because I see the hurt person behind it, and I
Mm-hmm.
see why I got overweight. I see why I did it. I was like you. I was binge eating a lot, eating out
Yeah.
constantly.
Mm-hmm.
Food became I was trying to remember my question from earlier. You said a lot of good things in your story, and food was a coping mechanism for me, just like
Mm.
you. I don't know why it was. I felt comforted. The more I ate, the more I indulged in things, like
Mm.
getting coffees every day, having cookies every day, eating out
Yeah.
every day as much as I could. It brought a sense of comfort.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to ask you when you it looks like you went through a weight loss journey on top of this. I was really
Mm-hmm.
curious to ask you when you went through that journey of healing and went through that weight loss and looked at that coping mechanism you had, What was that biggest shift that you noticed as you started healing along that journey? What became a new coping mechanism for you?
Well, back in 2014 leading up to 2015, I really kind of just came to this point where I knew I wanted to improve my health, not just my physical health, but my mental health. I was just tired of living in just kind of on a hamster wheel, where I wasn't making the progress I wanted in life. I wasn't where wanted to be, in my career or in my love life or whatever it may be. I just wasn't the person I felt like I was supposed to be. And so I had started contemplating, knowing that I had such a struggle with binge eating. I started contemplating utilizing what tools can I use to try to help mitigate that piece while I also partner it with working on my mental health, like really working on my trauma and my mental health. And so I landed on um, weight loss surgery. So I was kind of teetering if that was a way, like a direction I wanted to go. And what solidified my decision to move forward with that was in February of 2015, I found myself having to fly out of state to go to my grandmother's funeral. And on both the flights headed down to the funeral, I ended up being body shamed and humiliated on two separate flights. And while over the years I dealt with, looks or comments or, just different ways of being treated over the years, because at my highest, I was 330 pounds. So I went from 170 in high school up to 330. That's a lot of weight, right? And so I just remember in those situations on the plane, I was seated in the middle seat on both of my flights. I didn't want to be flying in the first place. I certainly didn't want to be encroaching on anybody else's space. I just wanted to get down to be around my family. And the gentlemen, they were, I don't know why I call them gentlemen, because they really weren't in the way that they behaved, but they made a scene asking to be reseated, and one made a bigger scene than the other, and I just sat there and took it, not wanting to draw more attention to the situation. I was filled with rage. I was filled with being just completely mortified. And I just wanted to, if I could have fit under the seat and disappeared, I would have. But it was in that moment I was like, all right, when I get home, I'm contacting a surgeon's office and I'm moving forward with that part of my healing. And best decision I made for my physical health. I ended up losing the 160 pounds I had gained over the years within a year, because it does come
Wow,
off incredibly
congratulations to you.
fast. Yes, thank you. And that came with its own, um, things that you have to work through as well. Um, but I have no regrets. This is 10 years since my surgery this year. And I was in, just such a great headspace and physical space after having done that, because I was really intentionally focused on improving both of those simultaneously. And, it's not to say that I'm fixed and healed and all the things, because I'm not, and that's okay.
Mhm.
But with that surgery, I called it a rebirth for me. It's like I was taking the physical and visual weight of my past, right? Associated with all that past trauma, and I had to let it go, in a sense, right?
Yeah, because you talked about how all that weight was a body shield of armor for you to
Hmm.
protect yourself from what was going on. And
Absolutely.
uh, Gina, that's really powerful. All right, sorry, I'm taken aback by this story. That's just really powerful that you. I mean, we started this podcast with a girl that went through sexual assault and gained all this weight to be a body of armor.
Mhm.
And I love, by the way, that you're not talking about weight loss in the form like we see in society of like get thin, look great, you know, be this person.
Mhm.
I love that you're talking about it from a mental and physical combined component of that weight loss journey because I think
Mhm.
that's something more important. I went through on my weight loss journey when I lost 45 pounds. Like
Yeah,
I didn't care about how I looked. I more so cared how I felt inside
absolutely.
and
Mhm.
mental as well as physical inside my
Mhm.
body. I just felt so much better. Like you said, you got that clarity, you got that better
Mhm.
feel from within. And I think that's really, you know, what that's about is that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I had to um, grieve the loss of my former self. I had to grieve through the loss of my innocence. I had to grieve through parts of me that were stolen over the years. I mean, there's just so many different layers to that. Um, but again, it just led me to where I am today. And I'm proud of the progress I've made over the years. I'm a big believer in that, none of us ask for horrific, painful things to happen to us. But over the years, and, you know, a lot of what's gotten me through, especially over these last 5, 6 years, is really leading into my faith. And I am a firm believer that, you know, he's using my pain for his purpose. I'm meant to share my experiences, share my story, um, because there's someone out there that needs to hear it. And with that, you know, I am hopeful that it will help them feel seen and heard. It'll help them feel less alone. And at the end of the day, I want to be the person for someone else that I needed when I was going through these hard times.
Uh, I I love what you just said because that's that's exactly the mission I'm on after
Mm.
what I've gone through. And I think, I think you and I were talking before we jumped on the recording today, but that's the beautiful gift that came out of all this.
Mhm.
I think I told you I call these things that happen in our life that are really ugly and somebody call them brutal was the word I heard last
Ah,
week.
I
Uh,
like that.
Beautiful and brutal at the same time.
Mhm.
And I call them the gift in shitty wrapping paper. I say I didn't want this
I like
thing. I
that
didn't
too.
ask
Yeah.
for it. And a lot of us, I always am like, ugh, like what? Ugh, just get rid of this thing. I don't like this. Those gifts that we get though are exactly the ones that we need, and they're the things that give us the lessons, the blessings, and the gifts of our life.
Mhm.
And I love how your mission is to make sure to be that person that you never had. And
Mhm.
I was so taken back by your story about going through those assaults and not reporting or not wanting to report it, being scared or nervous of what might come out of that. And then getting empowered by that girl that reported that person that attacked
Mhm.
you. And I think, and you getting the courage to step up and say, I need to go report this for me. I need to go report this. And
Mhm.
that girl played the role that you're now playing for other people. And I think
Mhm.
that's such a powerful the term soliloquy is coming through my brain from poetry. It's just a beautiful way that that's transformed in your life. Um,
Yeah.
I something you talked about when we first met was refocusing your attention, and I think your story today has really demonstrated this story. I wrote this line down when we first talked because I thought it was really powerful. Is refocusing your attention and not letting it overcome you. Um,
Yeah.
I really thought that was such a powerful statement you made because it's easy for us to, especially those of us that experience severe trauma. I've talked
Mhm.
to so many people that have been suicidal. I've talked to people that have lost somebody to suicide, people that have lost children. Um, our grief can get so heavy at times, that we don't know what to do with it. It's so heavy.
Mhm.
But when we give it all that negative attention, when we do, it has the power to destroy us.
Mhm.
But in that same moment, we still have the power to create, and we have that power to give back. And I see that story coming out of you as we talk today, is that you're creating and you're helping
Mm.
be that person for those people that you didn't have in your own trials of life. And I think that's such a beautiful gift that you're giving back to the world today.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. It's something I take very seriously at this stage in my life. And, you know, like you were kind of talking about with those of us that go through these hard things, it can either take us down completely, and it almost took me out a few times in my life. Um, and thankfully, it's been almost 20 years since my last suicide attempt. So again, that's something that I am so thankful to be freed from. Um, but I have this saying that I found years ago, and I keep it on a little card in my car ever since. And it talks about, because even through trauma and stuff like that, there's a big layer of fear that's involved in whether it's not wanting to deal with things or what will happen if you do, all of that. And so the saying is, fear has two meanings. You can fear everything and run, or you can face everything and rise. And I mean, that has resonated with me since I came upon it years and years ago. And because, I could have went down a completely different rabbit hole with all of this.
Yeah.
um, but yeah, I after many years of the deep, dark suffering from it all, I chose to make something different of it.
And I think that's the choice that we're all faced with. And
Mm-hmm.
I talked to somebody, I think it was earlier this week. I don't remember who it was, but they themselves got assaulted by their grandfather from the ages of 3 to 10. And I couldn't. This guy was one of the most beautiful people I've met. By the way, you would never know that that would have happened to him. Just never would have known. And I remember him telling me, um, in that story, he said, I very easily I could have been that abuser that abused me. I could have been
Mm-hmm.
that. And I chose not to. I chose to
Yeah.
become a healer. I chose to become somebody to help other people. And I thought it was such a powerful statement when I talked to him, because he shared a story, and I'm saving that for another podcast. But I'll just say, kind of like your story, I end up in this kind of shock and awe of, like, how could somebody do this to another person? I don't understand that. And I see people like you share your stories of that. And then I see all the beautiful things that people like you were doing because of that experience in life. And then I sit there and go, wow, the fact that that could have gone down really dark roads, really bad roads. It might not have ended well, by the way. It might have ended opportunities. I would never have gotten the chance to meet these people in my life. I never would have. And they're out there being authors, they're out there being coaches, they're out there in support groups, they're out there helping other people that go through these situations to help them navigate that, and ultimately save years of their life. And I end up in this place of just sheer empathy and gratitude for those people's healing journeys, just like yours. I mean, I'm inspired by you, Gina. I'm inspired by you, because to 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 hear your journey and how much time that journey took for you in your life and where you
Yeah.
are today and what you're doing with it, it's such a beautiful gift that you're giving to the world. And I know that it's paying itself tenfold forward. And you probably are helping people you don't even know, by the way. That's the beautiful part of this. Um, what one of the other I wanted to touch on this topic, since we kind of got to that place. You said a really powerful phrase in our initial conversation about courageous conversations with the
Mm.
ones that are closest to us. I'd love
Yeah.
for you to elaborate on that, because you had some powerful thoughts on that one.
The courageous conversations are probably the hardest ones to have. They are, going. it takes not just you, but other people back to situations that, you know, because we tend to avoid anything uncomfortable. And, without going into too much detail about some of those conversations I've had, but, you know, like even initially telling my family about the abuse that I endured as a kid. Like I said, I didn't say anything about that until I was in my early 20s. And some of the initial responses I got maybe weren't exactly what I was expecting, um, and didn't necessarily help with my initial healing of the situation. Um, but and the more recent courageous conversation I had was just within the last few years for something that was years in the making. But it not only helped aid my healing from that situation, but also theirs because it had never been talked about. And, we, there's, what do they say? There's a lot of hidden secrets, maybe, or hidden, not secrets, but just hidden things that have happened over the course of like family traumas, right? Decades back or whatever. I'm kind of hell bent on trying to make the buck stop with me with a lot of that. I don't have kids of my own to pass those on to, but I do have nieces and nephews and stuff like that. It has to end somewhere. and
I
and
agree
that
with
may be
you.
a heavy burden to take on oneself, but I'm up for the challenge, I guess.
I call that my wife calls it, she stumbled upon this, so I have to give her credit for this. But she calls it breaking generational curses. And I think that
Mm-hmm.
that I share your sentiment on that because for some reason I feel like I've been dealt that card in my life. That's why I've had a lot of turbulence in my life. And I can't explain why it's all happened without my consciousness going on. But
Yeah.
um I ran into it when I went through narcissistic abuse. I got written off
Mm-hmm.
every single time I bring it up. Nobody would listen. Everybody just said,
Mm-hmm.
"Oh, you're just blaming somebody. Oh,
Yeah.
they're just this person. You just have to accept it." And it comes back to, I have such a deeper, we talked about victim guilt earlier
Mm-hmm.
today, and I've learned that, there's people it's safe for me to talk about things with. There's people that are not safe to talk to. And, uh, I've learned that also when I had all my experiences dismissed or invalidated by people because I didn't want to listen or it was uncomfortable for them or they didn't want to understand, it makes you feel really isolated and alone. And I've started hearing this story from people that have committed suicide, people that have gone through sexual assault, rape, people that have lost a child. I've started hearing this across the grief spectrum that there's just people out there that just don't give us space. And
Mm-hmm.
I used to be in this place of being really frustrated because I myself, when I listen to people's story, I listen. I'm not there to say, "Oh, that didn't really happen to you," or "Oh, just get over it. It wasn't a big deal."
Mm-hmm.
I don't do those things. I'm always like, "Let me listen to you. You have a safe space with me to talk. I'm not judging or anything. I'm just here to listen and give you a listening
Mm-hmm.
heart," as one of my other guests referred to.
Yeah.
Um, the reason I do is that nobody gave me space growing up really to process emotions and feelings. Nobody listened to my experience. And so when I hear
Mm-hmm.
people that go through things, I give them space. But something that was really profound that I learned recently and was able to put into words, and again, a guest told me this, which was really powerful, is that people can only empathize in their to the level of their life experiences. And
Mm-hmm.
so a lot of times we end up trying to talk to somebody that we think is safe or somebody we think might listen to us, but they in turn then say insensitive things to us or they try to
Mm-hmm.
deny our experience. And then it's almost like I said, when you got assaulted at 21, that 9-year-old child that had that same experience came roaring back into the picture. That same thing happens when we're trying to find safe people to talk to. It's
Mm-hmm.
re-traumatizing to have people invalidate our experience.
Oh, 1000%. And that's one of the hardest parts I think of navigating trauma and grief over the years is having to find out the hard way who is and isn't those safe people. And for me personally, over the years, Up until more recent years, it was more like third party people, therapy individuals that were the safest space for me. And that's just because, I grew up and there were some complicated relationships growing up throughout my life. And so, and sometimes someone who's not directly related to the situation can be the best person, simply because, they're not going to tell you something that they think you need to hear or want to hear or sugarcoat it, which is fine for some people. But, like for me personally, I need someone who's going to put my feet to the fire and give it to me straight. And, um, don't tell me what you think I need to hear just because you don't want to hurt my feelings, you know? And I don't approach people that way personally, because I have a very huge empathetic heart. So, I don't want to hurt people's feelings, but you have to really be mindful of how you're speaking and reacting. Um, Especially if it's not a walk that you yourself have been on, you know, um, be honest and say you're not equipped to help them through that if you don't feel like you are, because you don't want to cause more harm, um, unbeknownst to you, you know.
Yeah, that's a big challenge I have as an acceptance coach, especially in the grief and trauma space.
Mhm.
I connected with a guy in a Facebook group last
Yeah.
month who I didn't know he was suicidal till we started DMing together. And
Mm.
I got very nervous because I had not talked to somebody who's been in that space and I haven't experienced it. So I was in a
Yeah.
whole I felt like I got chucked into the ocean of like figure it out, and I was
Yeah.
going, I don't want to cause more harm. I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't want
Mhm.
to put this guy in a worse place than he is, just by not knowing how to deal with this. And
Mhm.
I will say, by the way, this guy's been the greatest gift of my teaching, or
Oh,
teacher. He's been a teacher to me, is where I'm going with that.
it's incredible.
Um, and I'm very grateful for the outcome that's come with him. He did teach me a lot about how to talk to people in that space. So
Mhm.
I'm very grateful for that. But to your effect, you know, I think when we go through trauma and we go through our healing process, expressing our needs of how we want to be talked to. I'm a lot like you. I like people to be very direct and straight with me, and I don't mind people telling me the really harsh things I need to hear,
Mhm.
in a harsh manner. But I have had clients that are like me, and I can do that. I've also had clients where I've got to be way more on the empathetic side and shift that approach, so that
Mhm.
that message can not only be received, but it can be received in the way they need to hear it. Because we all, it's part of the trauma and grief space, especially. The only thing I can really relate to with that, is being a lost parent. I can tell you right now in the lost community, those of us that have lost babies, have lost children at a young age, we're very sensitive to certain things. And when people rub us the wrong way, say the wrong thing, oh, it does
Yeah.
not sit well. It's a very triggering, it goes 0 to 100 with somebody. So you got to be really careful how you say things.
Mhm.
And so a lot of us end up in that space of when somebody does say the wrong thing or in the wrong format or the wrong tonality for whatever reason, or it's not empathetic enough, we run because we just know it's not safe. And
Mhm.
so I love that you explained that today. I really, really appreciate you saying that, because that's something I want listeners today who listen to this episode. That's a big takeaway for you guys. What Gina said about there's going to be people that are safe, there's going to be people that are not safe. Being aware of how do you like to be talked to? What are you looking for out of that conversation? Do you need somebody who is more empathetic on that level, or do you need somebody who's just a straight shooter and you're able to hear those hard things that you need to hear. Figuring out your style of communication as you go through that healing journey, I think is a
Mhm.
very, very big part of not just getting the help that you need, but finding the right people, to make that journey most beneficial to you.
Oh, absolutely. And maybe it boils down to, when someone is coming to you with a really hard topic, just take a pause and ask them, do you need me to be here as a listener, or are you coming to me because you want advice? Because we tend to want to always give advice, right? And not just listen. So that's something I am constantly trying to be mindful of, and be better about asking in those hard conversations.
That is a beautifully said question. If you don't mind, I'm gonna have to post that online because that was such a beautiful thing that I wanna
You go
share
for
more
it.
about. I I love how you just said that. I love that question because it's putting I hope people don't take this the wrong way, but it's putting power back into that person that's looking for help
Mhm.
and letting them tell us what they need. I
Absolutely.
I think that's just a beautiful question. Are you
Yeah.
looking for a listener today? Or are you looking for advice? And that kind of guides you, by the way, as a person helping. Even me as a coach, I want to start using that, by the way.
Please
You,
do.
I want to because I think that's just so great because somebody will tell me I need somebody to listen to me today. Excellent. I'm mouth is shut
Yep.
right now. I'm all ears. Just I tend to be more of that, by the way. I tend to be more of a listener than advice giver, just naturally speaking. But I love asking somebody that because I think, um, I've learned with a lot of people that have gone through abuse and trauma. The biggest things I see, and it's even in the lost community, this is really big. Us grievers don't want to be fixed. We don't need to. That's not something you need to help
Mhm.
us out with. We will figure that out. But
Yes.
we need to feel heard. We need to feel seen, and we need to feel understood. And that's something that I've struggled with on my grief journey, finding safe people is the misunderstood part. I'm not actually looking for people to um, understand what it was like to lose a child. I'm not looking for you to understand that. I don't want you to, by the way. It's a
Yeah.
very painful thing. And I'm sure you feel the same way that I don't want somebody to experience sexual assault. I don't want that. I don't wish that on anybody.
Right.
Um, but I want somebody to understand that this is something I went through, this is something I experienced, and this is what I'm dealing with on my healing
Mhm.
journey. I think that's a powerful way to help people. I wanted as we get wrapped up on the show here, I wanted to give some time to discuss. You're an author now. Tell us a
I'm
little bit
working
about
on
that.
it. Yeah, this is a long thing in the making. I've been writing since I was 8, 9 years old, whether it was poetry or songs or short stories or whatever it was. And so I have signed with Hope Books, which is a publishing company. And I'm working on my first of many memoirs. I feel like I have at least 5 books inside of me. Um, and I'm working on my first memoir on my journey with binge eating disorder, and how it started, how it evolved, where I'm at now. Um, so I'm super excited about it. The projected, I'm hoping to get it out this year. That's the plan. So I've been making a lot of good progress with it. So I'm happy about that. Because of course you have to kind of relive things as you tell them. So it can be slow going at times, but um, yeah, I'm just so thankful that I came across the publishing house that I'm working with. I've met some incredible people. I've collaborated with a lot of other really amazing mental health authors. Um, so it's a beautiful group of people.
I'm really excited for you, Gina. I'm personally trying to work on writing a book this year. It's been a slow process getting started.
Yes.
Um, and the hard part for me, I was going to ask you, since you're in this process a little deeper than I am, and you brought it up. I've been struggling with that too myself, that I'm having to relive certain things, and
Mhm.
it is such a roadblock. There's certain parts of my thing I don't want to relive. I just don't. It's painful. Um, I'm just gonna, and I don't have to go into details or nothing, but I just want to ask that,
Yeah.
as you're going through that writing process, when you do face those roadblocks, you give yourself space to walk away at times and just wait for the opportunity to show itself to you in that process, or what's that been like as you
Oh,
write this book?
yeah, absolutely. There have been moments like when I first started kind of outlining what topics I wanted to write about, I was definitely getting in my own way a lot. But if it was seeming far too challenging to write on something, I would take a pause, and there would be weeks that I wouldn't sit down and write anything. And then I kind of shifted. I went to my annual writers conference with the publishing company in January, and I came back kind of with a fresh approach that just kind of spoke to me, in which, and like I touched on earlier, I'm very deep into my faith. And so that plays a big part in my life and my writing journey as well. And so I do two things now when I sit down to write. The first thing I do is I say a prayer and I ask him to guide my writing for me, which has ultimately kind of shifted a lot of things, because like he has given me things that he has driven me to write about that I hadn't initially thought to write about. So it's evolving my book, and it's actually coming out better in
I
my
love
opinion.
that.
So, but definitely, when there's those really hard pieces of the story to tell, you have to grant yourself grace if you need to step away. And it may take you a really long time to get through that one chapter, right? But maybe just take a different approach and work on some other less deep dive of a topic until you can feel ready to really dig into that one. Because you don't want to get so caught up in the re-traumatization of yourself that you
Well
can't
said.
get the words out either, right?
Yeah. I second you on that one.
Yeah. Because it's like you're having to trigger yourself, but at the end of the day, you are feeling the pull to write about these things because you know how it can help others, right?
And I think
Yeah.
that's the big mission on why I want to write a book is
Yeah.
I just love that you and I are on the same wavelength of things. We've
Yeah.
gone we've had our gifts of shitty experience of life, and we've walked that path, but now we're saying let's go help people so this doesn't happen to them. Let's
Absolutely.
I always tell people, I get asked sometimes, why are you a coach? And I said, I had to spend 25 years going through God knows what. I said, if I come across somebody who's in year 1, 2, or 5, and I say, hey, I'm going to save you 20 years right now and help you out, that's my gift to you. And
That is a gift.
if you get 20 years back or 10 years back coaching with me, I'm going to tell you you're ahead of me. And I hope you do something wonderful with that. Um, I want to, as we wrap up here, I got a couple questions I want to ask you.
Yeah.
If you were to run into somebody who is going through grief or loss or trauma right now, and they just experienced it, or they're early in that process of healing, what's one or two things you would offer them as advice to help them on that healing journey to start navigating it?
I would certainly recommend to, as hard as it may be, really look to find the right person or persons, whether they're directly in your life or a therapist or whatever it may be. Find the resources you need to start healing sooner rather than later. Because you can't get back the years of your life that you spend not dealing and healing. That
I
would
love that.
that would be my one and only big bite of advice.
That is well said, Gene. I second you on that because finding safe people to navigate that healing journey, I think, is the biggest game changer you could possibly
Mhm.
have. Because grief is isolating and very lonely at times.
Mhm.
And if you do have those safe people around you that make you feel seen and heard and understood, and give you a listening heart or a listening ear, and are there for you the way that you need them to be, that can really accelerate your healing journey, but also more importantly, just help you find that right path for you as you go through that.
Yeah, and you have to be willing to accept that it might not be the people you want it to be.
That's good advice as well. I never thought about that actually. Sometimes we get people in our lives that we don't always expect to be the one person that's going to do that for us, and they end up there. Um,
Hmm.
and, and my next question I want to ask you as we wrap up, where can people find you if they want to connect with you online?
Right now, you can find me on Facebook or Instagram under my first and last name. I'm assuming you'll have that in the show notes, but I can spell it out if you'd like me to.
I'll definitely put links to your social media on the video as well. I'll definitely do that
Okay.
for you.
Yeah, and I'm working on getting my website put together, so hopefully that'll be out this by the end of this month, and it'll be my first and last name too. I'm keeping it real simple.
I love that. Keeping it simple works. I love
Yes.
that. Yeah. Well, Gina, I just want to thank you for being a guest on the show today. This has been a real honor for you to share your story with us. And I just want to thank you for being vulnerable and also sharing that journey and those things that helped you navigate trauma through your life. I see such a beautiful person that's on a beautiful healing path right now and has so much more to give to other people that are going through similar situations in life. I think you're a beautiful gift for people you haven't even met yet.
Thank you. I appreciate that, and I am very appreciative of all the amazing work you're doing to help people as well. So,
Well, I appreciate that. Well, I want to thank all of our listeners today for joining Gina and I on this episode of the Empower Grief Journey. If this episode resonated with you, please share it with somebody you know that could benefit from this. I also want you guys to know the Empower Grief Journey isn't about honoring your journey, embracing your emotions, and finding strength in your own time. I want to invite you guys also to follow this podcast on Facebook and YouTube at theempowergriefjourney.com. I also want you to know you're never alone on this journey, and together we can navigate grief with courage and compassion. Until next time, be kind to yourself and take your grief journey one step at a time.